British monarchy has just detonated a constitutional bomb that nobody saw coming. Minutes ago, King Charles made a move so unprecedented, so earth-shattering, that it sent shockwaves through Westminster and left Prime Minister Keir Starmer scrambling for answers. What you are about to hear is not just another political scandal. This is the moment everything changed. This is the moment the Crown reminded everyone who truly holds power, and what happens next could reshape Britain forever. Parliament has been shut down, not suspended, not prorogued for some routine procedure. Completely shut down by direct order of King Charles III. The timing could not have been more explosive. Just 60 minutes ago, the official announcement dropped like a political atomic bomb, catching Westminster completely off guard. Senior MPs were mid-debate when the news broke. Cabinet ministers were blindsided, and Keir Starmer, the man who believed he had a firm grip on power, watched his authority crumble in real time. The question gripping the nation right now is simple but terrifying. Why? Why would a king who has carefully maintained constitutional balance since taking the throne suddenly exercise royal prerogative in the most dramatic way possible? The answer is more shocking than many expected. Behind the scenes, a crisis has been brewing for weeks. Sources close to the palace describe it as the most serious constitutional confrontation since the English Civil War. And it comes down to one reality: Starmer pushed too far. His government, emboldened by a massive parliamentary majority, has been forcing legislation through at breakneck speed, bulldozing opposition and treating parliamentary procedure as a formality, rather than a safeguard. What the Prime Minister forgot is this: in Britain's constitutional monarchy, Parliament ultimately operates with the consent of the Crown. And when the Crown decides that constitutional boundaries have been crossed, even the most powerful Prime Minister can become powerless overnight. The trigger came 3 days ago when Starmer's government attempted to rush through emergency legislation that would have fundamentally altered the balance of power between Parliament and the monarchy. While full details are still emerging, insiders say the proposals involve stripping key royal prerogatives, limiting the King's authority to dissolve Parliament, and reducing the Crown to a ceremonial rubber stamp. It was a power grab disguised as modernisation, and King Charles refused to accept it. Royal advisers warned Starmer's team that they were crossing a constitutional red line. Those warnings were ignored. Legal experts were consulted, only to be dismissed as outdated voices clinging to tradition. That left the king with one remaining option: remind the nation that the Crown is not a tourist attraction in ceremonial robes, but the bedrock of British constitutional law. Under long-standing convention, royal reserve powers exist for moments when democratic balance itself is at risk, a safeguard rarely used but legally preserved. What makes this moment even more explosive is the public response. Instead of mass outrage, public opinion is swinging sharply in King Charles's favour. Social media is erupting with support for the Crown. Hashtags defending the monarchy are trending nationwide. The reason is simple: voters are exhausted by politicians who believe winning an election grants unlimited authority. Many see this intervention not as authoritarian, but as corrective. Charles did not shut down Parliament because he is power-hungry. He acted because Starmer's government was becoming too dominant, too dismissive of constitutional conventions, and too willing to override democratic norms when they became inconvenient. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore. British history is shaped by struggles between Crown and Parliament. Charles I attempted to rule without Parliament and paid the ultimate price. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 established limits on monarchical power. What modern critics miss is that this is not a king seizing control, but a king enforcing constitutional restraint exactly as the system was designed to allow. The monarchy exists as the ultimate constitutional safeguard. When democratic institutions are weakened from within, the Crown holds the authority to apply an emergency brake. That is precisely what has happened. Starmer's response has been nothing short of a political meltdown. His initial statement was rambling, defensive, and clearly driven by panic, exposing just how unprepared his government was for a constitutional challenge of this scale. He was clearly operating in panic mode. The Prime Minister attempted to frame the King's decision as a direct attack on democracy, branding it unprecedented and unconstitutional. That argument collapsed almost instantly. Constitutional lawyers dismantled it piece by piece, pointing out that King Charles acted fully within his lawful authority as monarch, and more importantly, that his intervention was justified by what Starmer's government was attempting to do: Starmer then moved to rally his MPs, calling emergency meetings and scrambling to coordinate a response. But this is where the plan began to unravel. Privately, nearly half his own party felt a sense of relief. Backbench MPs had grown increasingly uneasy with the government's aggressive posture and growing overconfidence. They had watched Starmer's inner circle behave as if they were untouchable, forcing controversial policies through Parliament with minimal scrutiny. The King has now done what many MPs lacked the courage to do. He forced a pause, a moment of reflection, a constitutional timeout. The international reaction has been just as revealing. Leaders around the world are watching Britain's constitutional drama unfold with a mix of shock and fascination. Some have condemned Charles, claiming this represents a setback for democracy. Others, particularly across Commonwealth nations, are asking a different question. Perhaps elected leaders having limits they cannot vote away is not a flaw, but a safeguard. Perhaps modern democracies need institutional checks that exist above party politics. The British system, often criticised as outdated, may possess something that purely presidential systems lack: a non-political authority capable of intervening when politicians lose their way. What happens next remains uncertain, but the implications are enormous. Charles has effectively frozen the government. No new legislation can be passed. Parliamentary business has ground to a halt. Starmer remains Prime Minister in name only, but without Parliament his authority is largely theoretical. He cannot legislate. He cannot manipulate parliamentary procedure to advance his agenda. He has been checkmated by a constitutional move he never anticipated. The clock is now ticking. The King must either call a general election or restore Parliament under strict conditions, and neither scenario favours Starmer. An election would send his party to voters immediately after being publicly rebuked by the monarch for constitutional overreach. Hardly a winning message. A conditional restoration would force Starmer to publicly retreat, accept new limits, and govern under the King's watchful eye, permanently weakening his authority. Behind closed doors, the palace is coordinating with senior constitutional experts, former prime ministers, and leading legal scholars to chart a path forward. This is not about Charles seeking absolute power. It's about restoring balance and ensuring such a crisis cannot be repeated. Sources indicate the King is open to restoring Parliament swiftly, but only if firm guarantees are secured. Guarantees that protect constitutional conventions, prevent future governments from attempting similar power grabs, and reinforce the delicate balance between Crown, Parliament and people that has underpinned British democracy for centuries. Opposition parties are seizing the moment. The Conservatives, still recovering from electoral defeat, see an opportunity to reposition themselves as defenders of constitutional tradition and institutional stability. It is a calculated strategy, but a dangerous one. Push too hard and they risk appearing opportunistic. Push too softly and they lose momentum. Liberal Democrats and smaller parties face the same dilemma. Some openly support the King's intervention, others urge calm and constitutional dialogue. With public opinion shifting rapidly, no one wants to be on the wrong side of history. The media reaction has been nothing short of explosive. Newspapers have rushed out emergency editions with headlines that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Television networks have suspended regular programming for wall-to-wall coverage. Political analysts are flooding studios, many admitting they have never witnessed anything comparable. International media is treating this as the most significant British political crisis in decades, with American networks drawing parallels to major constitutional showdowns in US history, while European media continues to analyse what this crisis means for Britain's relationship with the EU and international institutions. One thing is clear: this is no longer just a British story. It has become a global event, forcing democracies around the world to re-examine questions of power, accountability, and constitutional limits. Across newsrooms and universities, legal experts are in constant demand. Constitutional law professors are giving non-stop interviews, unpacking royal prerogative, the long history of Crown versus Parliament, and the legal mechanisms available to resolve a crisis of this magnitude. Opinion among experts is divided. Some defend King Charles unequivocally, arguing he had no realistic alternative given what Starmer's government was attempting to push through. Others take a more cautious view, accepting the King's legal authority while questioning whether exercising it was politically wise. A smaller but vocal group is openly critical, warning that this moment could set a dangerous precedent and invite future monarchs to intervene more freely in politics. Yet even the harshest critics concede one point: Starmer's proposed legislation was constitutionally problematic. The real debate is no longer about whether the king had the right to act, but whether he should have acted, and public opinion is increasingly decisive. Most believe he should have. The economic impact is already beginning to surface. Markets dislike uncertainty, and constitutional crises generate it in abundance. The pound has swung sharply as traders try to assess what this means for Britain's long-term stability. Investment decisions are being paused, and international firms with UK exposure are watching nervously. However, the reaction has not been catastrophic. Some analysts suggest this restraint reflects a belief that the King's intervention is stabilising rather than destabilising. In their view, a government attempting to rewrite constitutional rules posed the greater risk, and Charles's decision may actually reassure investors that Britain's institutions are resilient enough to resist radical overreach. Inside Starmer's government, panic is spreading fast. Ministers are scrambling to assess what this crisis means for their departments, their policies, and their personal futures. Some are quietly distancing themselves from the Prime Minister, briefing journalists that they had reservations about the constitutional legislation, but were overruled. Others are publicly loyal while privately questioning whether Starmer has become a political liability. Cabinet meetings have grown tense and paranoid, with ministers watching one another closely, trying to determine who remains loyal and who is preparing an exit strategy. This is how governments collapse, not through dramatic resignations or sudden votes of no confidence, but through the slow erosion of trust and cohesion. And Starmer's government is eroding rapidly. Public sentiment is complex but increasingly revealing. There is widespread confusion, as most citizens have never witnessed anything like this and struggle to understand the constitutional mechanics involved. Beneath that confusion, however, lies something more powerful: relief. A sense that something drifting dangerously off course has been corrected. Early polling conducted in the hours after the announcement shows surprising support for the King's decision, with a clear majority believing Charles was right to intervene. Even more striking, a significant number of respondents say they trust the King more than elected politicians, a devastating indictment of the modern political class. The historical importance of this moment cannot be overstated. Future historians are likely to identify today as a turning point, the day the Crown reminded modern Britain that constitutional monarchy is not merely ceremonial theatre, but a living, functioning system with real powers reserved for genuine crises. For decades, those powers existed largely in theory. Now they have been used. This is not about King Charles expanding royal authority. It is about restraining governmental power, and that distinction is critical. He's not claiming the right to rule Britain, but asserting the right to stop others from ruling improperly. The days ahead will be decisive. King Charles must outline the conditions under which Parliament can be restored. Starmer must choose whether to accept those terms or resign. MPs must decide whether to stand by their Prime Minister or break away, and the British public will be watching every move. One thing, however, is beyond doubt: British politics will never be the same again. The long-standing assumption that the monarchy would remain completely detached from political conflict has been shattered. Future governments will know there are constitutional lines they cannot cross, and future monarchs will know their reserve powers are real and usable. King Charles has not destroyed British democracy. He may well have preserved it. The Crown has spoken, and Britain will remember this day for generations.